Hello and welcome. This is Lights Out, and away we go with the episode. With a Formula One podcast for fans, by fans. I'm Will, and as I look across the digital garage, as always, I'm joined by my co-host, or should I say my co-driver, Sam. Hello, Sam. How are you?
Hello, Will. Hello, listeners. I'm very well, thank you. How are you? How was your weekend?
Yeah, very good. I've managed to source some new hay fever tablets, which means I'm now no longer suffering as badly as I was last week. You would have seen me. I had really red, puffy eyes, and I'm sneezing all the time, and my eyes are no longer itchy, so that's good. But yeah, nice, relaxing weekend. But just very chilled with no Formula One on, so just nice to relax and see some friends. But yeah, how about you?
It was very nice, thank you. Yeah, it was. I felt like I made the most of the weather. I went out and played football on Saturday, and then we had a bit of a kind of summer social thing after we played. So spent a lot of Saturday evening in pubs in South London, which was very nice. But I did have some regrets Sunday morning, particularly with a 1-year-old who doesn't really discriminate between kind of dad's at top on top of his game days and dad's very hungover days. So it wasn't.
Can't quite tell what a hangover is just yet.
No. Thankfully, my partner very much took the lead Sunday morning and got me off the hook a bit, which was very welcome. But yeah, it was a very nice weekend. Thank you.
Good to hear. And before we jump into today's episode, some breaking Formula One news for you. Ryan Reynolds is part of a consortium alongside Rob McElhenney and Michael B. Jordan, has invested 24% they bought 24% of Alpine, which I think they spent, if they the value, basically what they valued the Formula One team is just shy of £1 billion, which is quite extraordinary. So if you think Alpine aren't top of the table, and they're nearly $1 billion, Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes must easily be north of that. Yeah. I did see Ryan Reynolds. Apparently, he should be known now as Ryan Reynolds.
Yikes! Very good.
So, in today's episode, we're going to discuss our favourite circuits.
So, yeah, exactly. So, we're going to go through in this first section. We're going to do our top 3. So, Will, why don't you give us your third favourite circuit on the calendar at the moment?
Sure thing. So when I was assessing what my top 3 were going to be, I set myself a bit of criteria when looking through the calendar for this year to see what to pick out. And so I went for ones that that really show up a Formula One car, where they're sort of the pinnacle of motorsport. The design where your cars sort of going through corners like flat out, or really flying through corners, and ones that have driver challenge as well. So they've got challenging corners as well, but also a variation as well. I'm not a massive fan of circuits like Monza, where it's basically a lot of straights with a few corners thrown in there, which aren't that great. Also, I really like a circuit that has a fan atmosphere to it, that really adds the drama of what's going on in the circuit. There's nothing worse than going to circuits and the seats being empty, or it just feeling like there's no sort of fan atmosphere. I think some of the Middle East circuits suffer from that a little bit, whereas the European races have probably the best fans in the world and on the calendar. And most importantly, for me, does the circuit deliver a really good race? So honorable mention was to Saudi Arabia. That probably wouldn't have been in the conversation had I not played the Formula One game, the new one. And that Saudi Arabia circuit is a brilliant street circuit. Really quick, flat out, really hard corners as well. My actual experience as a Williams driver on the game did not go very well. I was battling with Lance Stroll, and I made a mistake. He drove through, tried to sort of get past him, and I absolutely binned the car off into the wall, complete write-off, and basically spent 45 minutes in that race for it all to be for absolutely nothing. But that didn't affect my judgment today. So my actual third choice is for Austin in Texas, or as it's known as the Circuit of the Americas, or as it's abbreviated to, COTA. So if you hear me say COTA, that's what I'm referring to. Reason why I love it, it's brilliant. So as the layout, it's a really good circuit. The first sector is a bit of a lot of tight corners, S corners, which are really flat out, really challenging to drive. The cars absolutely fly through them. And then the middle sector is a brilliant long straight, which is really good because it generates lots of overtakes mid lap, which is always good for a race. You don't want it to always be at the start finish line into the first corner. And then that final sector is again some really good corners that make that they have to drive flat out, basically. So yeah, I think a lot of drivers really enjoyed the Qatar circuit. Um, Also, a really good atmosphere as well with the rise of Formula One in America, and it's sort of been much bigger sport. They've been selling out year on year, and the atmosphere, you definitely get a sense there's a really big atmosphere growing of Formula One in America, and that's fair play to Kota getting in there, being the first America circuit on the current calendar, and it's been well established for a number of years now. They've really nailed the sort of fan experience, I think, and that really comes across when you're watching it from home. I probably would, I'd probably pick going to that over Miami. Maybe not Vegas. Need to see what Vegas is like. We've not had any mega classics, not any races that have gone down in history as sort of iconic for that circuit. But we still have had entertaining races, and it's probably a little bit of a victim of it because it comes quite late in the calendar. Sometimes we've been there, and the World Championship is basically a foregone conclusion, so it's not had any sort of championship jeopardy to it, which some of the others have had. But yeah, big fan of Kota. Really, really good circuit.
Nice. A very good selection. So I didn't pick it in my top 3, but I do really enjoy the circuit. I mean, the main reason I didn't pick it, and it's a bit harsh because it hasn't really been on the calendar all that long, but one of my categories for selection was memories, whether or not certain things have happened, big things and big events and big races have happened at those circuits. And as you said, it hasn't quite happened at Kota yet, but I think it will. I agree with you. I think the racing there is really good. The track's great. The drivers love it. And something that I really enjoy about it as well is a lot of times some traditionalist fans, of which I think we are both probably in that category to some extent, don't really like that they're trying to break the US with Formula One. And like having races over there has historically been a bit like lots of European fans haven't been too bothered about it because they don't think Americans really care about it. They're more interested in like NASCAR and IndyCar and things. But I think Kota really demonstrates that that's totally untrue. And I just love the culture of it as well. But the fact that it's in Texas, like you always get like the kind of crazy cowboy stuff, and like Daniel Ricciardo just spends the whole weekend walking around in a Stetson. Like it's just great, and they love it. And yeah, I'm totally on board. I think
He turned up in a horse last year.
I know it's just great.
And even the horse had a paddock pass.
Amazing. So yeah, I can see why you picked it. We nearly had a good race there, didn't we, last year? Hamilton and Verstappen. It was looking like we were going to get another bit of a kind of Hamilton Verstappen classic, but as it turned out, Verstappen's car was significantly better than Hamilton's throughout last season, and it stayed that way during Kota. But Hamilton got quite close, and Mercedes were on the sort of upward trajectory by then, so it was looking much better. So yeah, we almost had one last year. Maybe we'll get one this year. I think it's definitely, I think you're right about when it's timed. There's definitely something about if it was a bit later, it would be one of those clutch World Championship Grand Prix, and if it was a bit earlier, maybe you'd see a bit more kind of top of the World Championship battling. Whereas now, as you say, it's in that place where, particularly if you have one dominant team, it's quite often looks like it's going to be over, but not formally over by that point. So hopefully we can avoid that this season. But yeah, no, a very good selection. Any other comments on that particular race? I'm trying to think of other like particular events and overtakes and stuff we've seen there recently.
Yeah. No. Again, like I was thinking then when you were saying about historical memorable moments, I was sort of struggling. I remember, I think Kimi Räikkönen won. Did he win his last Ferrari race there? I think I can't remember.
I think he may have done. And well, last year Russell drove inside of Sainz or something, didn't he? That was quite fun. That was quite a funny moment. I remember that.
He did, yeah. And I did enjoy when I don't think they do it anymore, but when they first went there, instead of the Pirelli caps, they gave them Pirelli Stetson hats, cowboy hats, which is quite good. Yeah. But my final comment on Kota and Austin is, I think because it's a purpose-built racetrack, and Miami is a street circuit and Vegas is a street circuit, it could become even more popular because at the moment, on the current trajectory of Miami, that's not very popular at all. We had two pretty meh races there. The drivers don't seem to like it. And Vegas, yes, it's an amazing location. I think the drivers are really excited for it, but there's a lot to be seen with how good it is as an actual race circuit and the race it delivers as well. So if it's another one of those sort of boring street circuits, there's a strong chance that Austin becomes even more popular as a fan circuit of the American ones. But yeah, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens with Vegas.
Yes. It is interesting having 3 races in the US, isn't it? I can understand why, but I'm minded to agree with you. I think Cota definitely has to stay, and it feels a bit like Vegas is going to be doing a lot of the things they wanted Miami to do, or it did last year in terms of the sort of glitz and glamour and stuff. So
Yeah.
it will be interesting. Now, knowing you as I do, I've got a suspicion I know what the other 2 that make your top 3 are, or make up your top 3. So I'm gonna push you for your second choice, and suspect perhaps we've gone in a similar route.
Oh, interesting. Oh, interesting. So I've gone for Brazil.
Yeah. Okay.
Is Brazil in your list?
I've also gone for Brazil number 2, so not just on my
okay.
list, but in the same position. Yeah.
Okay, so shall I? I'll give you. Shall I give you my spiel of why
Yes.
I think Brazil is there on my list, and you can also talk us through what your criteria as well if it differs from mine.
Yep.
So Brazil, Interlagos, you know, a scene of many great races, and it's probably the best race we've had so far of a sprint race, where the drama it created was blockbuster, and it was one of the highlights of the season. I don't think any sprint race has got anywhere close to how good that was. Partly that was because Lewis Hamilton at the time was in probably the fastest car and he was starting last. But it lived up to expectation of him charging through the field, and it was an amazing sort of piece of sport and entertainment, which is what Formula One is these days. So yeah, but also it's the scene where Hamilton wins his first World Championship in changeable conditions with the weather, which really added to the spectacle as well. The first corner, which goes down a hill, is always a brilliant corner. It just seems to really throw the drivers, because we've had so many incidents where the people have crashed into each other many times, and I think the most famous one is when, to my mind, is when Verstappen and Ocon crashed in that corner, and when they both get out of the car, Verstappen is pushing Ocon around because he's so furious about him. So, that first corner is a brilliant way to start the race, creates drama. And then the middle, another sort of memorable bit is after that first long straight in the first sector, we've had it where it's a really even circuit where drivers can really challenge each other at various different points. And we saw there where at the height of 2021, when Verstappen and Hamilton were clashing like that, we'd never really seen that corner be much of a moment where there's been big overtakes. But then Verstappen pushing Hamilton off there at that point was quite a big moment there. I just love it that there's so many different moments where a driver can dominate at that, or start pushing around and defending or attacking. And I really love the final corner, which kind of ends. It's quite a tight bend, and then it's just a really long run up the hill, past the pit lane into the first corner, which is obviously, as I said, downhill. I just think it's a brilliant, and we've seen so many good races for the line where people have tried to sort of got very close. It's obviously good at sort of giving people a tow. Fans brilliant in Brazil, probably some of the best we have, and they've got behind the right driver in the World Championship battles in the past with their support of Lewis, which is good to see. The drivers seem to love being in Brazil as well. I think it really lives up to the sort of the hype and the expectation every year. The weather is also, like I said, can be unpredictable because it's usually November time we're racing in Interlagos, and it always throws something into the mix as well. Please tell me why is it shot to number 2 on your list?
Yeah, you've covered a lot of ground there, and many of the points I've written down as well. So I think the top one is Sao Paulo is quite a special place. I think it's culturally very different as well. I think to the rest of the calendar, it's quite culturally unique. And you've talked about the fans, the history there, Ayrton Senna as well. There's just so much there that really add to it and make it quite a special atmosphere, I think. And as you said, the drivers, it's always listed in their kind of some of their favourite races. History is a big factor as well. So, I mean, you've referred to Lewis winning there, obviously in 2021, and also when he won his World Championship there. The weather, funny enough, is a factor in all 3 of my top 3 as well.
Ooh,
changeable weather always makes for a great race, and generally there are certain countries, some of which we've already referred to in bits of the world, that it doesn't really rain ever, where unfortunately you don't really have that additional fun factor in the mix. It's funny you mentioned the first corner, because I've actually written down incline decline, makes it a really interesting race as well. Because
Yeah.
as you say, the first corner, I think they dropped like 35, 40 meters in one corner, or the first, the first and second sort of bends into that first straight. That does make it really interesting as well. Like it's quite a different challenge for the drivers, which is quite good fun. It's also quite a clutch race as well. I mean, you'll hear that phrase again when I refer to some of the other races or some of the other circuits that I like, because of where it falls on the calendar. Often it ends up deciding drivers' world championships and ends up being quite an important race in the sort of the run-in, as it were. So that's another factor. And the last one, purely selfishly, is that I used to play on the PlayStation all the time, and Interlagos would almost always be the first race I went for on any new Formula One racing game, just because I really enjoyed the circuit. I also really like, and this is really nerdy, but I really like that it's anti-clockwise as well, rather than a clockwise circuit. It's clockwise are the majority of circuits actually on the calendar. So for them to be constantly turning left on an anti-clockwise circuit is quite different. Some drivers really struggled with that, funnily enough. I think I remember Alonso and Massa both saying it was a bit weird for them, like turning left more than turning right, because the rest of the year they're basically turning right the whole time. So that's another random little factor for you. But yeah, it's just a brilliant race, culturally interesting. It's always a massive event. Fans love it. Drivers love it. Yeah, there's literally nothing about it that's not good. Circuit's great, atmosphere's great, timing's great, weather's always interesting. Yeah, it's just brilliant. It was very close to my top tier, top spot, but not quite.
And it's interesting as well because it's one of the circuits that Formula One doesn't really need to change much or do much differently there. Like, even with these current cars, I think we'll still have a really good race when we get there, because by that point in the season, the development will be a bit closer. But you say go history. I can remember like this West Senna got his when he first won there, and that was in the 80s, 90s. Even since back then, it's delivered like historic and like really memorable moments in the sport as well. Am I correct? It's the only circuit in South America we go to, right?
Yes, I think they used to race in Argentina years ago, but that got dropped in the 80s, I think. So yes, I think it is. It's not the only one in South America they've ever gone to, but it is on the current calendar the only one.
Yeah, and I was also thinking then, as you were talking, that although it's because for a number of years it was the last race of the calendar. So I think Button won. Did Button win his world championship? He won his world championship.
He
there,
did, yeah.
But I don't think that was the last one. But when Hamilton was there, it was the final race of the season. When in 2008. And I was going to say, it's a bit of a shame it's not the final race of the season, but actually what's worked out quite good is it's still settled world championships there in recent years. And usually it's been very rare, actually, that the final race of the season has actually decided the world championship. So, Abu Dhabi, I think they paid a lot of money to have that final race on the calendar, but they've not really had the benefit, really, because that circuit is nowhere near as good as Brazil. So I'm glad Brazil still sort of kept its sort of special status of creating real drama at a really important part of the season.
Definitely.
I feel like now we should go to your third choice, seeing as we both had the same second choice.
Yes, and I think my third choice will probably be your top choice. So we'll have a bit of chat about why that's the case. Okay. It's not really much about this circuit in particular. It's more about the one that I have picked in first. But I've gone for Silverstone in position 3.
So I have also got that was my first choice.
I thought you might.
Okay. Yeah. Do you want to kick? Seeing as I had the honour with Brazil, do you want to kick us off with Silverstone?
All right. So again, multiple criteria have been met. The weather, as any of you listening to the podcast who live in Britain will know very well, that the weather is extremely changeable here, even in the middle of the summer when the British Grand Prix tends to happen, which always makes it quite fun. The circuit is fantastic. In terms of a pure racing circuit and a racing surface, it's probably the best on the calendar, actually. And that usually means we get quite good, quite close racing. I mean, even last year where we had a really dominant team, and I think we'll probably have the same again this year, to be honest. It's still really close, and it's a great kind of aero circuit as well, which usually results in some quite fun overtaking and setups and stuff, which is good. So yeah, the racing's good. Obviously, British bias. We have to get that in there. Yes, we're both Brits, so we're obviously going to pick a British Grand Prix. and memories, as we've talked about. So I mean, some really amazing races have happened at Silverstone. I mean, we've talked previously on the Lewis Hamilton episode, some of the races he's won there. One in particular in the rain where he won by 30 seconds or something stupid, was amazing. I think Vettel won there in a really brilliant race as well.
Yeah.
And even last year, as I said, we saw some great moves. Hamilton's double overtake. Through goes Hamilton.
Very good.
Yeah, it was just it's just really. It was Carlos Sainz won his first race there last year as well. It just consistently delivers, and although it happens relatively early in the season, so we don't see championships decided there, the racing is often good enough, and to such an extent that doesn't really matter. Like, it's still a great Grand Prix, and also like you kind of have to trust the drivers to some extent, and the drivers always list Silverstone as one of their favourite to drive. So yeah, that's why I've got it in my top 3, but not quite on my top step. What have you?
It's going to take something special to not be as good as that. I mean, that was almost faultless. I could see no fault of why it should not be your number one.
Well, we'll get to why in a moment.
Okay, we'll hear that. Yeah, very similar reasons, really. As you said, it's the driver's favorite circuit, I think, for a lot of them, and I think they really enjoy it in these current cars, that they can just go through a lot of these corners like even quicker than they were doing previously, and 70% of the lap is completely flat out, which is extraordinary. That foot is hammered down the accelerator, which is what it should be at a race circuit. Some of the recent drama we've had there as well has just been iconic. If I just go through the last 3 years of it, we had 2020 when we had 2 races there, and we had that was the year of the exploding tires. Do you remember when Hamilton's front tire exploded and he limped on to win the race? And then
yes,
it happened to a couple of other drivers as well, which is something we've never seen before. So that was an iconic moment. 2021 when Lewis and Max went into that corner, and Lewis had the right position and Max got absolutely binned into the wall, and that was when the title battle really spiced up, and it really did define the season, I think. As we said in previous episodes, like, that was the moment when the battle became very personal and just went up, not just a level, several levels, and it was because of the circuit and the drama it caused there. And I think, in that context of that race then, Lewis takes immense pride of it being his home race, and it's almost like it's his honor to defend, and it's his to win, and he's got to hold off the other drivers from winning his home race. And so that was an amazing moment. And then, like you say, last year as well with the two overtakes going into Club Corner. If you've not seen that, just check it out on YouTube. It's probably the best overtake you'll have seen in a Formula 1 car at such a key point in the race between front runners in recent years. We could get rain this year. I mean, it's not been as sunny, as rainy, as full as we've had a bit of mixture over the last couple of weeks. So in 2 weeks' time, we could be talking about a wet Sunday in Oxfordshire. And also this year, I think a lot of fans are going to be very excited for it, because a lot of teams still bring upgrades to Silverstone, and we should maybe take this with a pinch of salt. Mercedes are saying Silverstone could be their best race of the season. And so if Lewis Hamilton wins, or if George, but if Lewis, especially if Lewis does, I feel like we'll be crack open the champagne after that podcast, because that'll be a massive celebration as well. And also, finally, one of the criteria I said was about the fan atmosphere. It generally is one of the only circuits where you can generally hear the fans reacting to the drama as it's unfolding. Like, I remember last year with some of the drama that was unfolding with safety cars and some of the overtakes, you could hear the fans like it was almost like someone it was the proper live. It was like a football crowd basically, which I just thought is that you don't really see many places where, like, as soon as the moment happened, you could really sense that the crowd was sort of on the edge of their seats, really responsive to what was happening. Whereas a lot of circuits, you don't really hear much of them reacting to the drama. So yeah, for me, I obviously like Brazil, but for me, Silverstone is a clear favourite, especially with the British bias as well. And let's fingers crossed. Let's predict it. We've been pretty good at predicting a few things so far on this podcast. Let's predict it. I'm going to predict it now. Let's predict for a Lewis win.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so I mean, I'm waiting till Brazil for my expectation of Mercedes and Lewis, but I'd love to see him win. He does. I agree with you. I think he races at Silverstone differently compared to every other race on the calendar. I think he definitely treats that one as it's kind of, I mean, I know it's a home event and stuff, but there are other drivers with home Grand Prix as well, but none of them drive differently, I don't think, in those races, where Lewis, he's a bit more of an animal, I think, at Silverstone. We see him do things that he potentially wouldn't do on other circuits, which is great. I love that.
And also he interacts. I was going to say, sorry. He really, like, at nearly every Grand Prix, you'll hear him say the words, "Oh yeah, the fans have been awesome," but like, he buys into the fans and really like plays up to the crowd. And the year I went in 2021 when he won, I remember saying to my partner before we went, like, if we could just see a Lewis win, that'd be amazing. And then in the style that he did it was amazing. But then he gets out of the car and runs towards the grandstand with the Union Jack after the race. You don't really see those sort of celebrations from many drivers when they win a race. You don't see Max do that at Zandvoort, his home race. So to see him like really play up to the crowd and the crowd really respond to that as well was amazing. Sorry.
Back I was just going to, on the fans, I was just going to say as well, it's one of the few races every year basically where you guarantee that the stands are pretty packed for all of the practices, the sprint, qualifying, and the race. Like they sell it out every week, every year. So it's like, I think they had like 380,000 people or something over the course of a weekend last time. It does really well, and there is a definite level of passion for Formula One, I think. It channels itself through Sky Sports when you're watching on the telly. I agree with you. Like it's the one race every year where you can hear the fans all the way through it. And that definitely adds something. And the drivers can hear that as well, even though they're sat, in extremely loud cars, thinking about how to get around the circuit as quickly as possible and avoid binning it. They can hear the fans as well, which is, it must be amazing actually to drive like that.
Especially through all that noise of a Formula One car and for the noise of the fans to cut through, it must just give you sometimes, even if it's your home race, that must give you absolute chills.
Yeah, definitely.
So Silverstone has not made it to the top of your list. It's only made it to 3. So what has made it to first? Because this is going to be a really good circuit, and you said it's not on my list. So I made an absolute error by not putting this into my top 3? But go on.
Maybe I don't know. I'm not sure. I judge you. I think I was thinking about this earlier when I was thinking about my top 3, and a top 5 or a top 6 would be quite easy because there are some others like Spa and. Spoilers, Spa is not my number 1, and Qatar you've already talked about. Monza, like there are some really good circuits. Not really. I don't think so. I don't think it's a great spectacle race-wise. It was better this year because of the weather and stuff, and it made it quite kind of interesting. But I would say a good Monaco Grand Prix is an outlier. Normally, you watch the qualifying on the Saturday. That's the highlight of the weekend, and I get why people like it because of the glitz and glamour and stuff. But from a pure racing show perspective, it's not the best.
But then it has a sort of special status in the fact that like it's the only race basically that's decided on a Saturday. No other races is the qualifying so important to the race, and that's quite interesting. Sort of seeing that shootout.
It is,
but I suppose for like a race circuit, it's like say at the moment it's not been a good one with the cars being so large and heavy, and overtaking being so limited.
Yeah, if you like world tour racing and overtaking, then Monaco's not for you. So
yeah,
that's,
So okay, so is it? Can I have a guess of what it is?
Go on.
Is it Zandvoort, the home of the Dutch mega fans, and Max Verstappen?
No, again for the same criteria. Not much wheel-to-wheel racing and overtaking there either. I've gone for Suzuka in Japan as my number 1.
Very good. And so sell it to me. Why is it? Why does it deserve to be number 1? And why should I maybe reconsider my choices?
So it ticks every box. Or on my list of kind of key criteria. So it's the most clutch Grand Prix by far.
How are you defining clutch?
So, and I know you love a statistic and a fact. So
yep.
There have been 32 races held at Suzuka since 1987.
Okay.
In how many of those do you think either the World Drivers' Championship or the World Constructors' Championship has been decided?
Oh, it must be so many. I reckon it must be like something ridiculous because I can already think of
It's half.
Wow.
50%.
Wow.
16 of 32. There's been a Drivers' Championship or a Constructors' Championship decided in that race, which is like, there are no other races that come close to that. Just by the way, it's since 1987.
I'd love to know what Interlagos' percentages.
I think it's up there. But obviously it's been running a lot longer, and it used to be the final race of the year, and obviously the points system was very different
Oh yeah, fair.
So anyway, for the last 30 years, it's been the most clutch Grand Prix. So for that's one reason. Brilliant. Loads of championships have been won there. The second is the track is amazing, and it is really good. I mean, it's got the best corner in Formula One, 130R. It's the best. It's the best corner in Formula One.
Which one's that one again?
It's the really fast sweeping bend where there have been quite a lot of accidents down the years.
130R.
It's called 130R because it's the 130 is the radius of the corner.
Because it's a figure of 8 circuit, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is just it's a fantastic corner. It's a fantastic circuit. Lots of overtaking, good wheel to wheel racing, loads of history there. I mean, never mind the fact that all these championships have been won there, but it's also been the place that we saw like Michael Schumacher drive into the side of Damon Hill and bin the car off. We talked a lot about the Mick Hakkinen Michael Schumacher rivalry over those 3 years, and it was decided in 2 of those 3 years in Suzuka, 2 years in a row as well. And even when you talked about some of the other races in the late 80s between Senna and Prost, 2 of them were decided at Suzuka. It just delivers every year. Drama's great. The weather, very changeable in Suzuka as well. So again, that factor's been met. And fans and culture, I think it really ticks that box as well. Like the Japanese love the Formula One. Culturally, it's just really interesting as well. Like the love they have for certain drivers. And yeah, just generally the kind of vibe around the circuit on a race weekend seems really nice as well. And I just, selfishly, I really like Japanese culture in general. So I think it's just a cool place, like cool circuit. And yeah, always delivers. So that's why I had to pick it as my top one.
I feel like if we ever go on the Lights Out pod tour, we should make our first race. Maybe just save up all our money and go to Suzuka, because I think you're right. Like, to go and experience the culture, it'd be so different to go anywhere else on the calendar, really. And yeah, I do agree with you. The weather has really affected it as well. I mean, the only downside, I'm surprised this is not factored into your rankings, is the only problem I have with Suzuka is to watch the race. You have to get up so early on a Sunday morning. It's literally like 5 o'clock to see any coverage, and then it's 6 o'clock start, which I don't massively appreciate. But then with Vegas, that's going to be 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning because it's on a Saturday night in Vegas. So maybe that will ease the troubles of getting up for Suzuka.
Yeah, I don't mind it. I think it's worth it. And also, I've definitely got fond memories as a kid waking up relatively early with my dad and watching the Japanese Grand Prix, particularly in those 90s sort of years when Schumacher and Hill and Mansell and others were all going at it. That period of Formula One and getting up very early on the Sunday morning to watch that race was quite an evocative memory for me, because I think I mentioned to you as well, like before, the reason I got into Formula One was my dad, and we used to watch. We used to go out and work every morning and get loads of stuff done before the race started. So on those Sundays, can you imagine how early we'd have to get up and go? And I often didn't go, to be honest. Like, my dad would just leave at like 3, 4 in the morning, go and get it all done, then come back and wake me up to watch the race. So it's just got fond memories of that particular race.
What work were you doing?
Well, in my case, usually picking up leaves and pine cones.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So he used to sort of look after like a few local businesses and properties and stuff from like a landscaping perspective. So he'd be around there on a Sunday and tidy them up, get them all presentable and stuff ready for the Monday. So like doctor's surgeries and places like that. So
very good.
Yeah.
Oh,
there you go. A little trip down memory lane for you there.
Yeah, I've known you nearly 6 years, and I never knew that before. So that's good to keep learning about each other.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm similar to you. And I remember sometimes when my dad was waking up us on a Sunday morning, and if it was a good race, we'd be all glued to the TV watching it. And if it was a dull race, some of us would just doze off back to sleep in front of the TV until the end of the race. I've definitely had that a couple of times where you get woken up by the anthems. But yeah. I also should say about Suzuka, it was definitely a circuit that was really missed during COVID. I think there was 2 years we didn't go there. And that was a real shame, I think. And I think the drivers really missed it being as well. And I think, it was nice last year, like when Yuki was I think it was the first time he'd raced there as a Formula 1 driver, and the reaction he got from the crowd as well. We should also say, the only another downside, as much more serious than an early wake-up call, it's been the victim of some dangerous incidents in the past.
It has.
With Jules Bianchi sadly losing his life as a result of an incident there. And, even last year, the marshals were not to blame them, but like they made mistakes in the use of the cranes and what was on the track when the cars were still going around at full racing speed with very poor visibility because of the heavy rain. And like say when we talk about Niki Lauda as well, one of his World Championships ended there because of he was so uncomfortable driving in the weather there.
That wasn't actually at Suzuka, Niki Lauda's. No. So that was at Mount Fuji. Also, it was in Japan, but they didn't race in Suzuka there. It was at Mount
I thought
Fuji.
It was Suzuka. Oh, fair play. Oh,
but good memory. It was also good memory. It was in Japan. Yeah, it was. Bit of different circuit. I don't actually know what's happened to that circuit. I should have a look at it. Maybe I'll do some research.
Yeah. Okay, so that concludes our top three. I feel like we've ended up covering a real range of circuits, even those that aren't in our top threes. And it's funny that we've shows how probably similar we are. We've got some of the same, but at least good for you, listener, that we've not said the exact same top three because that would have been a bit dull. So yeah, that concludes our top three. After the break, we'll talk about which of the circuits we'd get rid of on this year's calendar, and then which ones that aren't on the calendar we'd bring back from previous years. And so with that, we'll take a quick break. Welcome back from the break. Hope you had a jolly old time. We had a very jolly old here. I've jinxed my hay fever from talking about it at the start. And so I think as this podcast is progressing, I'm sounding more and more sniffly. So if I suddenly have a sneezing fit, I'll hopefully try and go mute, but apologies if not. But at least it's not a video podcast. You don't have to witness me sneeze everywhere, which is always a grim thing. But anyway, back to Formula 1, back to circuits. So we covered off our top threes in the first half. This one, we're going to start off by talking which circuit of the current calendar of the 23 or 22 of what we will actually race with the postponement of Imola. Sam, I'll come to you first.
All right.
Which of this year's circuits would you bin off and get rid?
So there were a few factors at play in my selection here. So one was whether or not the circuit itself is particularly good and conducive to racing. And then the other was about whether or not perhaps Formula One are catering for too many races in a close geographical location. Like, could they have races elsewhere? Like, is it a race that's needed? Was my question I asked myself. And I don't hate Max Verstappen completely, and I also very much like Holland or the Netherlands for a great many things, chiefly Dennis Bergkamp. However, the Dutch Grand Prix is the one I've gone for. Zandvoort has to go.
Why?
The race is rubbish. I mean, it's very simple. Like, that is it. I know it's got one interesting corner that's banked, fine, but they all take the same line through it because it's the most efficient way around the corner.
Yeah.
Overtaking is really difficult, and we all really know the only reason we're there is Max Verstappen, and I don't really like that we're going to there's a circuit on an already packed calendar at the cost of some other ones, which I think are much better, which we'll talk about it in the next section. Basically to cater for one driver and his level of popularity. And the geographical question, I think, is an important one because there are loads of races in Europe, particularly in Northern Europe, and a lot of those races are already dominated by Dutch and Max Verstappen fans, right? If you go to Spa, or if you go to Austria, or even if you go to Germany, and even in Spain, like,
yeah, I was going to say when I went to Barcelona, the biggest fan base I saw outside of Alonso fans, was probably Verstappen fans.
Yeah, and so that makes me think, well, they're kind of Northern Europe in general is quite well catered for races. Some are definitely better than others, and I think if you were looking at trying to introduce other races in other bits of the world, that might be one to think about. And it depends what your criteria are. And I understand the reasons for going there at the moment. I just don't really agree with them. So yeah, that's the one I've picked. I know you've mentioned it a couple of times jokingly on the pod already. So I know I'm in keeping with that. But I just want to say up front that it's not because I hate Max, which I don't really anyway. I just don't like him as much as some other drivers, and I very much like the Netherlands. But having a race there is stupid.
I do agree that it was probably close to being on my list of ones to when I was considering what to say. I was giving it an honourable mention, and I think before we first went there, well, because Zandvoort was on the calendar years and years ago,
Yeah.
Not in the last 20 years. And the big thing about it, I remember, and the big hype about it, and it was being teased a lot, was like the final corner is just an amazing banked corner, so a big sort of downward slope, and then it's going to be so interesting and so exciting to watch the racing. And you're right, it's been a bit of a damp squid. It's not really been spectacle, that final corner. It was sort of teased to be. And the circuit, from playing on the F1 game, it's quite a nice circuit because it undulates, it goes up and down, some fast bits as well. But an actual, watching it on TV, we've not really had many classics. I think Max won every one we've been to, the two we've been to.
Yep.
And it did feel a bit like, definitely last year, maybe less so the year before, but with the way the World Championship went last year, it did feel a bit like almost like a parade or a bit like a fan event. And it, the amount of orange you saw in the crowd, which is fair enough, got a good crowd, fair enough. You can't control who's going to buy tickets, but it was almost like so heavy, like Red Bull and like Max, that it kind of like, it felt almost tainted in a way that no other race feels like it's so one-sided towards one driver. The British Grand Prix, where if you go to British Grand Prix, you won't just see a bunch of, it won't be dominated by Hamilton fans. There will be a lot, but you'll see a lot of McLaren, Williams, you'll see other teams as well, whereas it is just basically a Max fest. And too many orange flares. And I think what's also a bit frustrating is that, like, a lot of Sky really play up to it. And Sky massively hype on the fact it's Max. There'll be literally next to no coverage, I reckon, of Nick de Vries, partly through his own fault. But it won't be like, great to have another new Dutch driver. At that point in the season, Max will be probably on a run, and it'll be a bit of a homecoming, I think, for him, which is a bit of a shame, really, because no other circuit is treated like that. Italy's not talking about that. Monaco, that's Charles Leclerc's home race, and that's not talked as, it's obviously a big hype about him, but not in the level and the portrayal of it as well. So yeah, I could be happy with Zandvoort. And I agree with you. There are a lot of, like I said, we only have one South America race currently on the circuit. We have nothing in Africa. We have quite a lot in the Middle East. We only have one in Asia, in Japan, because we don't go to China at the moment, and we don't go to Vietnam, got cancelled. And there are also some other really good circuits in Europe that we don't go to anymore. We don't have a race in Germany. Hockenheim's not been on the calendar for a number of years. Turkey was quite good during the COVID years. Portugal as well. There are some other good circuits that maybe they should rotate them a bit more throughout the year. And that's why I thought Formula 1 were going with COVID, when they had to basically rip up the calendar and rewrite it. They did a really good job at, like, last minute going to some circuits we've not been to in Europe for a while. And I think people quite enjoyed the variation. Whereas if you go to Zandvoort for 10 years, I just think people are going to get bored of it pretty quickly. I'm pretty sure Max get pretty bored of it as well, because, like, he doesn't really particularly play up to the crowd. So it's not even like it's going to be fun to watch him, really embellish being in front of his own crowd. He'll just be his usual grumpy self.
Yeah, no, I fundamentally disagree with the concept that you have to have a race somewhere because a famous driver is from that country. And Germany, you make a really good point there. Like, the fact that there isn't a German Grand Prix, and Germany has historically had a really massive F1 following. They've produced loads of drivers. One of the most successful of all time. Well, two of the most successful of all time. And it's a country that's home to one great Formula 1 team, arguably now, in Mercedes. I know they're based in the UK, but the brand and the company is based in Germany, and Audi are joining F1 soon as well. Like, it's, if you're looking at it from a purely kind of corporate perspective, there are other countries that you could potentially look at doing a similar favor for, let's say, that they don't. And it just annoys me a bit. And I would feel differently if the spectacle was different. I think if the circuit was a bit more interesting, there was more opportunity for overtakes. If it was a bit longer, maybe, as well. I mean, it's a nice setting. It's on the coast. It's quite pretty. It looks nice, and but that's not. Anyway, that's not one of the core factors. And good racing is kind of the top one. And it doesn't really deliver that ever, from what I can tell so far, and it never can. Particularly with the cars the size they are. I think it would have been fine back in the 70s when the cars were teeny tiny and much more raceable. I would drop the Dutch. What about you? What's the one you would drop?
So like I said, honorable mention to Dutch. And I was going to say, we won't be doing, if we go on a tour, pod tour, we won't be going to Zandvoort.
No, it seems unlikely now, doesn't it?
Yeah. But so for mine, is Qatar. We've only been there once, and when I was looking at the calendar, I couldn't even remember what the circuit was. With that first race we had there in 2021 was not of note. Yeah, it happened towards the end of the season, but I literally cannot remember anything that happened at all. Turnout, I don't think was that great. Don't remember there being a big crowd. Some of the drivers didn't feel particularly comfortable being there. Lewis had had a pro LGBT helmet on because of that sort of region it was in. Felt very sport washy, very we pay a lot of money to host our own Formula One race. Didn't really know why we'd gone there apart from I think because of the COVID. The COVID years, it sort of they offered to host the race, and then as I was just to try and re-jog my memory about what happened there, this is literally what Wikipedia said about. This is literally the only bit of the paragraph about the race that was there in 2021. Mercedes driver Lewis Hamilton won the race ahead of Red Bull driver Max Verstappen, while Alpine's Fernando Alonso scored his first podium since the 2014 Hungarian Grand Prix. 3 drivers had their front tyre explode because they tried to do a one-stop. That's literally all it says about the race. And I couldn't even remember that. And I was looking at the Wikipedia page. Apparently, it's signed a 10-year deal with Formula One. So it's going to be on the calendar for 10 years. And they were apparently meant to build, I don't know if it's going to happen, but this year was meant to be a purpose-built circuit for the Formula One, and that's not materialised. Don't know why. Last year they took a break because of the World Cup. But yeah, I think it's another race in the Middle East, another one that could be accused of sport washing, doesn't have a great human rights record, which is, there are sadly a number of circuits that on the calendar that have that accusation and facts against it. And I really, if Formula One can find a way of getting out of that 10-year deal or just doing 2, or if this year can be a great spectacle, but I literally could not remember it. And I said it's on the new F1 game. I said about playing the F1 game. I had no interest in going driving a lap on it before this because I know it would be terrible.
Yep, hard to disagree with that one. It's only on the calendar because of money, which
Yep. Well, and also probably at the time it came on was convenience, but then they've obviously, like you say, they've offered a lot of money to stay on the calendar, so and probably offered good terms to Formula One to make a lot of money from it as well. So not like we say, one of the reasons why one of the other reasons why a circuit should not be on the calendar just because people can line their pockets or pay a ridiculous amount of money to be on the calendar when they're so prestigious.
Yeah, that is quite a few in the Middle East, isn't it now? Was it Qatar, Saudi, Bahrain, UAE?
Yeah.
Abu Dhabi, yeah. It's a lot. When you consider there's one in kind of Australasia, one in Asia, one in South America, nothing in India, nothing in Africa, one in Central America.
I mean, Formula One can't have an equal number from every continent, but there's a massive imbalance, and not for the right reasons. It's not like we're going to the Middle East so many times because there's great circuits there. We're going there because they're paying a lot of money to host and probably offering really good terms for Formula One to make some money off it as well, which is a real shame. So anyway, moving on from ones we get rid, what old circuit would you like to bring back into the calendar?
So I want loads back.
Okay.
I've got 4. I've got one that I really want. I'll give you 3 honorable mentions. So 1, Portimao, Portugal.
Okay.
I really like that circuit. It came in during pandemic. There were safety concerns, which is why it was dropped. But they've now they've sorted out their safety issues and they're back regraded as kind of whatever. I think it's classification 1 or whatever.
Yeah,
they can now host Formula One races. Nürburgring.
Oh, yes.
An absolute classic. The circuit they used to race back in the 70s and 80s was like 10 miles long or something stupid. So you'd have an enormous lap, albeit it's extremely dangerous. It would be really difficult to make it safe now, but if they could find a way to do it, I think it would be one of the best races ever, probably, by some margin. And the Nürburgring is... the last time they raced there was actually when Niki Lauda had his accident there. in the season he was racing with James Hunt, and they stopped racing there after that due to the safety concerns. Feel like they could do something there. And Adelaide actually was another one, which is a street circuit, funny enough. And we're not massive fans of street circuits, but this Adelaide was a kind of classic street circuit that was added because it was good rather than because they liked having it in Adelaide, because there's not a huge amount in Adelaide, but it's just quite a small city. But the circuit's really good. But the one I've gone for is, and I've mentioned it in the previous episode, can you remember what I said? I specifically said, can we make sure?
Oh, yeah. Sepang, Malaysia.
Yes, correct. And basically for two reasons. One, the track is great. There's a couple of really long straights, some really interesting corners, but at the end of the two straights, you get really good braking zones, which is ideal for overtaking. And the rest of the circuit's kind of quite interesting. It's quite twisty, fast corners, and a good test of the drivers and the cars. And secondly, the weather makes it carnage every time. It's
Did
like,
it go into like monsoon season?
yeah. So the race often happens during monsoon season, and it's one of those places that challenges the drivers in the dry. But when you throw in the fact that it rains a lot there and very often during the race, it just makes it extra interesting. But yeah, they unfortunately they really struggled to sell tickets for it, and they dropped it, I think, in 2018 maybe. I think Vettel was the last person to win there in a Ferrari, so I think that was maybe 18 or 19. But I would bring that one back and find a way to get more people to go to it rather than just drop it. But yeah,
well, you could get a job promoting it.
I'd love that. Yeah, little regular trips to Malaysia to promote the race. Yeah, I don't know how on earth I'd get people to pay money to go and go there. It is good though. It was always a good race. It always delivered. I just think it was happening in a time that Formula One wasn't quite at the peak that it is now in terms of popularity. And yeah, I think as well they probably priced people out to a certain extent, unfortunately. So yeah, they're the four that immediately came to mind. But yeah, I think if I had to pick one, Sepang would be my pick.
I was going to say on the Nürburgring, I know that Red Bull are doing some sort of like fan event at the Nürburgring later this year, and it's quite an interesting lineup already. So Yuki Tsunoda is going to be driving a German DTM, which is like a touring car, so just like not a Honda car basically. He's going to be doing a lap of that. Sebastian Vettel's taking some of his old collection of cars and he's riding them on biofuels, and so he's going to be doing laps of that. So like Nigel Mansell's.
He's got the FW14, isn't he? He's taking, nice.
He's taking a couple there, and then Daniel Ricciardo is getting into a Red Bull and doing a lap of it as well. And apparently, Max Verstappen is pushing very, very hard to Red Bull to let him go. But I think the insurance is basically like it's just so dangerous, and they probably his contract doesn't allow him to do it. So, so you might get some Formula One action there of watching an F1 car on the Nürburgring. But
maybe that can be the catalyst. Maybe Daniel Ricciardo flying around on in an old Red Bull could be the catalyst, or Vettel in an old Williams. It would be great if they could take the racing back there. And as I said already, I think Germany deserves to host a Formula One race for so many reasons, but chiefly the fact they've got a huge following in Germany, Formula One. It would be mad not to have a race for their benefit.
It would be good to see. It would be good to see an F1 car go around like that 10-minute lap.
Yeah,
it'd break the record, wouldn't it?
Big time. Yeah, it'd be great. Imagine like try strategy, and imagine like the pit lane strategy.
Yeah, you
in a 10-minute lap.
You'd probably have like it'd probably be like a 20. It'd probably only be like a 20-lap race or 30-lap race.
Yeah,
just because the laps are 10 miles long.
I think it'd be great. I don't know how filming it as well would be really difficult.
It's on. You can race the full circuit on the Gran Turismo game. And I've got like there's no Formula One cars in it, but there's like Super Honda, which is like the smaller version based in Japan. And I've got one of those cars, so maybe I should fire that up and do a lap on that and see if I survive the whole 10 miles in that, or if I just go around at a pedestrian pace.
Sounds good. Let me know how you get on. All right, come on. What would you bring back?
I'd bring back Shanghai, Chinese Grand Prix. It's obviously been on the calendar every year, and every year after a couple of months just gets cancelled because the COVID travel restrictions are so strict still in China, which is a real shame really, because China has always been a really good circuit. It's always come at the start of the season, so we've had some really good races in the past. Again, that's another early morning start, but yeah, no, I enjoyed that. I remember getting up early when Lewis was a rookie and he binned it in the pit lane, which still baffles me to this day. But it's a really good layout. It's got a really, really tight first two corners that have to be taken quite slowly, which is, I think, and they're quite tight angle as well. So it's interesting for the drivers having to sort of go from such high speed into such tight angles at low speed. I just remember, it's just got some good straights in it as well, some good twisty corners, which is ticking all my boxes. I was looking up at it as well, and apparently the layout is inspired from the Chinese character for Shang, which is the first character of Shanghai, which is quite cool. And apparently it was built in 18 months by 3,000 workers, which apparently, according to Wikipedia, is a remarkable engineering and logistics feat.
Wow. Yeah, that is fast. I mean,
yeah,
I'm not surprised because China
is the Chinese state.
Yes, but that is amazing. Yeah, it's they're quite complex things to build Formula One circuits. There's a lot that goes into making them like logistically. That's a massive undertaking. So yeah, that's a great fact.
And I don't remember them having great fan. Like, I remember some of the grandstands have literally been covered over for years. But like that main grandstand, that kind of, it's a really impressive main grandstand because it kind of goes over the straight and then connects to the paddock building, and it's just like, it's quite an impressive sort of structure, and it's always quite iconic, I think. But I would like to see it back on the circuit just because it's like, with so many street circuits, it's just such a good different option on the grid.
Well, also Zhou Guanyu's now in Formula One as the first Chinese driver. I feel like that would be. I mean, notwithstanding my earlier points about the Dutch Grand Prix and Max Verstappen, I feel like if they did want to try and draw more people to watch Formula One in China, it would make sense given they've got a Chinese driver to have a race in Shanghai. Do you think they'll bring it? Do you know if they're going to bring it back or anything?
I was going to say that because it's always earmarked on the calendar and it's not been permanently binned off, which is good. And I don't know my Chinese domestic COVID politics that well, but if it was me and I was, if I was the Chinese premier, I would be saying, actually a Formula One circuit is probably, can still put some restrictions, but hosting a Formula One weekend is probably quite a good way of sort of showing to the world that their country is back open and the borders back open. But China's obviously very cautious about COVID.
Yeah,
it's probably one of the few countries that's got such strict restrictions in place. So I don't know. Maybe like a couple of years' time it'll be back on the circuit. And I think people will be excited for it to be back as well because it's always earmarked onto the calendar and then obviously binned off, and then they've got to do something a bit different with it. But maybe that's when we'll have 24 circuits on the calendar is when China's there, and they're just going to keep chopping and changing what other ones. But as we said, a few of them have got quite long-term contracts, so fingers crossed they don't tie themselves into really crap circuits for another 8 or so years. I'm looking at you, Miami.
Yes. Okay. Right. I think that brings us to the end of the podcast. Thanks very much for joining us. Remember to subscribe and leave a review on your podcast platform of choice. If you enjoyed it, why don't you share it with a friend? Hopefully they enjoy it more than the anti-Dutch Max Verstappen haters enjoy the Dutch Grand Prix every year. Of which I'm not one. As I've already said, I'm not one of those people.
The caveat there. I should also say I'm not that one of those people either as well. But yeah,
I know you're not. The thing is,
like, caveat in there.
But that's how I think people who like Lewis Hamilton, for example, would be perceived if they said they were anti-Dutch Grand Prix. So that's why we felt the need to make that clarification. Follow us on Twitter at LightsOutLads, and on Instagram we are at the Lights Out Pod. Will, we're off to Austria.
Yes, we are sprinting to Austria as we have a sprint race on Saturday. Let's hope it's a good one because Baku failed to light off as we hoped. Really, it was a bit of a. I've just got a good pun in there with the name light off, kick off as we hoped. The good thing about Austria is that it's quite a short. So it's probably the shortest lap I think on the calendar. A lap doesn't take that long, so fingers crossed. There's some overtakes and there's always good going up into that second corner up the hill. We've got Austria. We've done our predictions, but just to remind you, we were both predicting Max Verstappen to win the race. But our actual 3 driver each predictions, we covered those last week, so you have to go and listen back to that as well. And can I continue my win streak? You have to find out.
I can't even remember who who I had now, who I've got to
Well,
keep
there
a
you
track
go.
of in the race. So.
If you, like Sam, can't remember who you've got, go back and listen to the episode, because Sam will be joining you to go and remind yourself. I also need to remember who I've got as well, make a note of it as well. But yeah, that's all from us. All the best and goodbye.
Bye bye.